Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another story and another video in my One Company, One Story series. This time, Rocket Lab. Here comes the amateur legalese. I began investing in companies and their stocks in the late 70s, but am not a certified investment professional. My style and history of investing is described in Dream, Invest, Live, a book I wrote by request, which came out as the Great Recession. Let's see if I can click that up. As the Great Recession hit, I call it the Second Great Depression. Don't underestimate luck, that happens. I am not an investment professional. This is not financial advice. It's throwback time. So, pardon my excursion from writing about companies worth less than $1 billion market cap. We're going to go over here now to Rocket Lab. That many people must not be $1 billion market cap, must be higher. It's 2 billions. Rocket Lab has about a $2 billion market cap as I type on November 17th, 2023. It's also a strong resonance with my professional career. Once upon a time, I was an aerospace engineer at Boeing Commercial Space. Let's pull that up. Keep flipping through tabs here. I was actually an aerospace engineer at Boeing Commercial Space, working on the reusable launch vehicles, and researching Rocket Labs has been a familiar walk through the concepts that the Big B threw away. Whether they did it intentionally or not, you can always get into why companies do what they do. But I'm glad to see that Rocket Lab is building some of those things, or at least things that are very familiar, and I'm glad to see that's being enacted on. So pardon the digression. Now, less about me and more about Rocket Lab. But if you want to talk rockets, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So rather than save it to the end, I'll recommend that if you are interested in Rocket Lab, and you don't need a primer, because this is really just going to be a primer. There we go. There's Scott Manley as a YouTuber that has marvelous videos. I wish I could do things as well as he does. And I actually bow to him in terms of even the expertise in many of the aspects of what the extensive technical and engineering aspects, as well as the finances and the implications of this company or any aerospace company are growing. So really go out, listen to him. He's a great guy to listen to. Okay, let's get back to me and what I presented here. So my video here is intended to be more of an overview for folks who aren't familiar with the company or the industry. Rocket Lab is an innovative rocket manufacturer. SpaceX has inspired many competitors. Rocket Lab is one. Many such companies get started with small rockets, naturally, and that's kind of that picture on the screen right now is a small rocket. You can tell it's long and skinny. For several years, they've been launching it and doing quite well, at least in terms of, they've got customers. Now, they call it the Electron. Don't be confused. It's not an electric rocket. Apparently, Rocket Lab is naming their rockets after atomic particles. I'll get on to neutrons soon, and then I'll have questions about whether they have a proton, which is also the name of a Soviet rocket. Anyway, commercial rockets are becoming common, but each supplier can distinguish themselves from the others in a variety of ways. And we're going to, there we go. Pardon the delay. Computers do that sort of thing. Rocket Lab seems to be focusing on reusability and subsequently low cost. Innocuous things that are important are the simplest in their support structure. So let's just take a look at that rocket as it launches. And instead of the big gantries and things like that you used to see with NASA rockets and things like that, there was a stick on a platform, and that's pretty much what it was. There's a little bit of supporting structure, but hardly the massive infrastructure that was usually wrapping a rocket. Then you take a look at, let's see if the computer's going to keep up with this. So much for broadband, always delivering high quality, high speed internet. You will still get gaps, especially if you're trying to do something fairly complicated. So pardon the delays. But Neutron, you can just see that looks like a fat rocket. And it is. Fatter means better interior volume. Better interior volume means a shorter structure. Shorter structure means less complicated structures to hold it up. Fatter also means cooler on reentry. If you remember the space shuttle with all those complicated tiles, flying back in the atmosphere can melt almost anything. That's why we just drop things in and have them burn up. So you had to wrap the shuttle in tiles and be very careful with them. They were very delicate. That's why they couldn't really turn around a shuttle very quickly, because they had to make sure there were no chips or any cracks in any of the tiles or any missing tiles. We saw what happened with that. Flying back in the atmosphere can melt anything, but the space shuttle was rounded, but some of those edges were sharp in comparison to Neutron's chubby nature. Neutron is a far fatter design. And while that sounds like a weird thing, let's see if they got a better picture of it. I'm sure they do. There we go. There we go. That's a far stubbier design. Well, what that also means is when the air is hitting that rocket as it's coming back, because we're talking about a reusable rocket and you want it to be able to survive re-entry, the more gradual curve of the wider body is cooler. Air gets hit more gradually, doesn't heat up as much. If it's not as hot, you don't have to use as fancy materials. You can turn the vehicle around faster, and you can also possibly have the life of the structure last longer. I'll pause here because the intent is to make this short, and with my history of reusable launch vehicles like the second generation space shuttle, which they never built, and DCX, which is referred to in some of these things as a prototype that goes back, well, as far as I go back, I could go on for years, and at least it can feel that way. I know I can go on for days because this, heck, I got a degree in this. I love the topic. I love the field. So, like I say, look at Scott Manley's stuff for the wonderful interview with like the CEO and tours of the factories and things like that. And while you're watching that, just keep in mind what happened with the Apollo, what happened with what it took to put people to the moon. And it was incredibly complicated because it was a very young industry at that time. And the industry is now 30, 40, 50, 60 years older. And one of the consequences is these things are getting simpler. They're getting simpler. They're getting more reusable. They're getting cheaper. So it's been nice to be able to see them coming along, but they're part of a large market. And they have to, well, they're growing to become a competitor to SpaceX, especially in the large payload market. And we're talking the diameter of this, you look at it's a 7 meter, so more than 21 foot wide rocket. That's a big Herkin rocket. You can put really big satellites in something like that. That's something that is limited on some rockets. You can't put in a too big of a satellite because the fairing is only so big. Here, there's so much room that they have some luxuries and they have some opportunities that most rockets don't have. Well, the first mover advantage in the non-reusable market was NASA and Soviets. SpaceX has been the first real mover in the reusable market. And it might be that SpaceX is able to claim and gain an effective monopoly. However, I think Market Lab don't know for sure, could be a valid contender either as the dominant provider, they may be able to do better than SpaceX, or as the other member of a duopoly, akin to Boeing and Airbus's position in the commercial airplane market. Or Rocket Lab could blow up, because rockets blow up. I was glad to work in the field for a few years and really impressed with the folks who worked in it for a few decades. And unfortunately, the launch I was most associated with disintegrated over the Pacific 2,000 miles from the launch site. So it goes. Well, Rocket Lab's CEO is not the wealthiest person on the planet, and that can be a positive and a negative. I mean, they can't dip into those pockets, but then again, they're not distracted by it either. But a CEO does not have to be a celebrity to do good enough work. As for the stock, and let's kind of been talking more than clicking through some of these things now that we started talking, but really seeing the Neutron is the main thing. And the stock's been trading since, at least according to Google Finance, about the start of 2021. $2 billion is a lot. And like I say, this is larger than I would normally look at for it in terms of a company. But that's just the price of a few really big satellites. It's easy for a satellite to be $1 billion for a satellite. So $2 billion market cap is relatively speaking, in that industry, not as large as, well, for instance, Boeing and Lockheed and those kinds of companies. The small end of the market is the one that's getting an awful lot of news. There's so many competitors in that end of it. But Rocket Lab may not be the only one, but it is poised to take that big risk, big reward gamble. It would be rare if they don't have a rocket blow up on occasion. That's the nature of the physics of rockets launched by burning fuel. When that happens, the stock will probably fluctuate, but I'm impressed with what they're doing and how they're doing it and where they can go with it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope they survive and thrive, and I'll be watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you find this useful. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm just way too much. If you can't tell, I have exuberance when it comes to the space industry, and I have to watch my exuberance, so I'm going to shut up. Thanks for being there.